Hi everyone, I'm super excited to host Alice, principal of Brick and Mortar Ventures. Every time I meet Alice, there's so much detailed discussion about construction tech, and I'm just learning from the interaction. So I thought, why not have her on the show? And so many things happen in 2025 and get her thoughts on those areas. So thanks a lot for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to come back and, update slash reflect. But I've also had a good time catching up with you over the years. And hopefully you'll be out here in San Francisco again during either April time or May time and come get involved with Former Labs again.
Yes, in our future tech time, like hopefully. Alice, so from Jan 2025 to December, what were some predictions you had uh, which panned out and which didn't pan out?
So I think in 2025, I was expecting there to be a lot more clarity around were contractors going to buy or build some of their own AI solutions. I don't think we've reached kind of full clarity yet, but we have gotten, I guess, a couple more signals. So as we talk to contractors, and I think this kind of started back in, 2022 when ChatGPT came out. I think everyone started, going crazy about this whole AI thing, and people were trying to figure out, okay, how do we set up an AI strategy? And I guess maybe that was more like early mid 2023 when people were starting to see AI kind of come into their personal lives a lot, right? ChatGPT took the world by storm. A lot of people were playing around with it, testing it out. Shortly after that, you had Google launch theirs, and then the construction industry being such big Microsoft shops. A lot of like early discussions around, how do we adopt Microsoft Copilot and, how much do we adopt? Do we start with, a small group of people? Do we ever roll out into full enterprise and have, every so I'd say, yeah, so that was 2022. 2023 was this like, okay, let's strategize around AI. Do we set up specific budgets for it? What do we need to know to prepare ourselves for AI? And I think a lot of the learnings from 2023 was we actually need to understand our data better. So I'd say 24 was kind of the year of, you know, we need to clean up our data. We need to understand, how to prepare ourselves for this future AI kind of thing. And 2024 was when we were starting to see contractors really set up special budgets for piloting and testing out AI tools. So that being said, and throughout these number of years, the ability to build softwares and, just the sheer number of AI development tools have kind of just drastically increased. And we started seeing, a lot of people play around with building their own tech. Obviously more like front end, simple kind of GPT wrapper type of things. But I think in 2025, we saw a lot more of that where people were within construction companies really, really testing that out, whether it's project managers or I've heard from a GC as well as a trade contractor that one of the type of person that's actually building the most of these like kind of front end simple GPT type tools were superintendents. So I think it was an interesting kind of learning that we were seeing what I would say like the underserved users within construction starting to leverage and play around with some of these AI tools to build front ends or simple digital forms and that type of stuff for their own use. So I think that was pretty exciting, though, like I mentioned, like we don't necessarily have clarity around that. And I think maybe in 2026 is when we'll see a lot more clarity around, what are the types of AI tools where contractors are going to build internally versus adopt kind of off the shelf. And I think a lot of this has to do with like segmenting out the size of the contractor, the type of trade, and then also the types of data that you're leveraging. Because for, a long time, even before this whole AI thing, contractors believe that certain types of data that they had was quote unquote proprietary or, data that they didn't want to share with startups. And I think now with AI, there's almost like a extra lens around that. There's more kind of privacy scrutiny. There's more IT scrutiny. There's now more like legal review when it comes to, leveraging models and sharing data and all that. And so I think 2026 will probably be a year where, yeah, we'll get just more clarity. And I had hoped that to be in 25 because that'll help, us kind of understand, how do we invest? And we're constantly still trying to figure out how do we invest in some of these AI tools. And we've done a couple in the past, but we're just continuing to learn and try to figure out, what is the best way for industry to adopt these tools.
Compared to 2024 and 2025, now the friction to build a product has gone low. Have you seen that correlated to number of inbound deals or emails?
Yes. I would say I would say like the coolest part of it is we are seeing more non-technical founders. Of course, kind of depending on what kind of tool you're building, you'll probably need kind of more technical talent. But if it's a simple kind of a workflow digitization tool or, anything that like doesn't require, leading edge kind of AI models or any of that type of stuff, I think it's totally like okay for a non-technical founder to be able to build something up to MVP and really get, a ton of feedback and really test out that idea before fully hiring, someone with a technical background to really take that, from MVP to, scalable product. So I think that's really exciting. We are seeing, yeah, definitely a lot more software tools out there, whether it's AI, whether it's not AI, the sheer number of net new software focused startups has definitely increased. Now, I don't know if that's because of, it being easier to build or construction tech is also continuing to grow
Mhm.
as an area of interest. So I don't know what the correlation specifically is, but it's probably a little bit of both.
Because I was curious, has that net increase been saturated or it's still rising?
So we just did our former labs application reviews, and I will say that like we are still getting applicants for a good number of applications are in the like takeoffs, bidding kind of proposal space. And we've already seen those startups over the last 2 years. So I do think certain use cases are continuing to be more and more saturated with startups. And I think it's just, the AI models are readily available to tackle those types of workflows. And I think a lot of people see that. And it's also, low hanging fruit and what people are willing to pay for. So because it's like so obvious, I think a lot of startups are still tackling that. And yeah, I would like to see some of these founders tackle other areas just because, if I count all of them up, there's probably like more than 20 at a
Mm.
minimum that I could think of off the top of my head that's doing this. Obviously, different scopes. You could like break it down based on scope of work that you're focusing on or a type of project that you're working on. But just given that like, these it's just getting easier and easier to build these tools, they almost feel more like, well, AI takeoffs should be, a feature of some bigger platform. Granted, I am talking about some of the more obvious stuff, which is more, symbol recognition, text recognition, and that. But on the other end, there are kind of deeper knowledge layers that have not been built yet. And I think that's where the startups need to focus. So unless if a startup is really going deep on understanding what's not in the drawings, like they may want to go try to tackle something else because we just have way too many startups doing that same thing. And I do think big opportunities in construction are still, understanding, like what's not in the drawings, a lot of like knowledge that's, still just in the heads of all these people. A lot of our documentation is still very poor. And I think, not everything is captured in one particular, document set or something like that. So, the way that these startups need to think about how do I gather the data to even create some type of model around that needs to be a lot more unique versus like, oh, I'm just going to look at the drawing set or I'm just going to look at, specs or something like that. Because I think at some point, like that's just going to be a feature across, a lot of these different tools.
I know YC has call for ideas, South Park comments. So what would be the call for ideas of Alice for 2026?
Oh man, I don't know. I feel like I've kind of just been a bit pessimistic about software these days, which is sad to say. Just given it's becoming pretty easy to build, and I think, unless if there's a really stellar kind of go-to-market angle or, something like that, I think kind of peer software is becoming hard to differentiate. So for 2026, like I think what's really exciting is construction robotics. I feel like I've been talking about construction robotics for many years now and, continue to try to push people to do more. Just looking at construction spend, a large portion of it is labor, and we just still haven't had enough kind of capital go into R&D or development of new equipment. I wish we could have a lot more kind of construction materials, but of course, that also requires a lot of heavy R&D expenditures. So I think with robotics, we're finally at a point where sensors are getting cheaper, even with tariffs. The talent is there, and frankly, we just need it. So I'd love to see more robotics across, many different types of workflows. I know last year we saw a bunch of solar. I'm hoping that we see more. The harder stuff is probably commercial construction, where there's a lot of things going on all at the same time. I understand it's a very complex environment, but it seems like, a lot of the vision tech and sensor tech is getting to a place where it should be possible. So that's an area where I'm very excited about. And on the software side, I think there's still a lot of opportunity on, some of the general workflow tools that haven't really scaled. And then, of course, you can get into, a lot of the big problems of the industry that someone needs to figure out a really kind of unique and compelling business model or structure to actually do something about. So one example is like, pricing. The industry runs on the lack of pricing transparency, right? But if we could all work together and have very transparent pricing in the way that we procure and the way that we buy, so that's still a big area where, to make the industry as a whole more efficient, we need to figure out how to buy things more easily. And I think there's a lot of startups trying to do something around procurement. But until you figure it out for the supply chain, you're still solving a very small problem. And it's for a very, particular customer. And I think there will be challenges with growing it to a really, really big company and changing the industry in that way. Yeah, really rethinking, within the supply chain, where are the incentives, structures, who the user is, who should pay, who shouldn't pay. It almost requires like a higher level view of the problem across the entire supply chain and trying to figure out, how do you actually change that? And yeah, I'm not creative enough to think about all that, but I'm always happy to chat with people who want to solve a big problem and kind of ideate around, where the incentive structures are and like who should pay, who shouldn't pay, who should maybe get the tool for free because, they're very, very valuable in the process, but may not have the funds to pay or may have too low
Mm.
margins or whatnot. There's like, yeah, probably a lot to dig into there.
We need a masterclass, Alice, on like business model and creative incentives alignment. So, what is a deal flow from start to end look like? Just to get an insight, like let's say a day in your life, you get so many emails. Which one would you open and or which ones you would just like, okay, spam, I won't even read. And once you read, how do you evaluate? Okay, it's worth for a meeting. And once you meet, how do you do deeper diligence? Because now one can make a very beautiful enterprise front end with vibe
Uh-huh.
coding apps, but then the underlying tech might not be that great. So all about that.
Yeah, I think that is a huge challenge, the really digging into the tech side. And thankfully we have Audie on our team that can help dig into some of the tech stack and make sure that it actually makes sense. But from kind of initial deal flow perspective, I think we're at a point where the just sheer number of new construction tech startups far exceeds, the amount of time that we can spend talking to every single one of these companies. And, this already happened, I would say, post-pandemic. I would say like during the pandemic when our whole team was locked down, we couldn't travel, like we actually did a pretty good job at trying to meet with every single startup that came through our doors. Now with just the massive explosion and now that we're way more serious about global, it's just become way harder to be able to talk to every single startup. So kind of a little bit of a filtering mechanism tends to be, is there a unique or eye-catching way that the startup is approaching us, right? Sometimes it's through LinkedIn, sometimes it's through email. I would say email is probably the worst now. We
Mm.
just get way too many emails from a day-to-day basis. LinkedIn tends to be a little bit better, but that's still, a lot of messages now. And I wish I just had more hours in a day to be able to respond to everyone, but the reality of it is we're at a point where there's just way too much, and it's hard for us to get back to everyone. And so that being said, you definitely need to be like unique, catchy, or try to go through warm intros, people that, we may already be connected with. I do still spend a good amount of time going through, the inbound through our websites, and reading the short blurbs and, trying to figure out, is this a call that we should take? To the extent that the founders can include pitch decks, I think that's really helpful because it gives us a really kind of quick sense of, what are you building? How big is the market and all that? And that really helps us prioritize, do we need to take the meeting now? Do we need to, do we have 6 months to take the meeting? Is this a better fit for Formwork Labs? Is it a better fit for another fund? We're also trying to triage because we still get, a lot of prop tech startups that reach out that are not really doing anything within the construction scope. And, it's a really easy like, hey, not within scope for us, but, we can suggest, a couple of prop tech fun friends that we like that they should go reach out to. I would say like for early startups, honestly, the best way to get on our radar is to apply through Formwork Labs because we do actually review every application for Formwork Labs. That may be a little bit of like a cheat code in getting in the door with brick and mortar now, just because we get, way too much inbound. But yeah, to the extent that you can meet in person, if we have people visiting in person, we usually try to make that meeting happen just because if someone is traveling to see you and it's an in-person meeting, we really, really do try to prioritize that, though that is, definitely not a requirement for an investment from us or to get into our deal flow process. So yeah, I don't know if I have any like good answers there. I know every fund has a different kind of, inbound process, but yeah, I don't think there's really any good way.
Yes, definitely. I've seen like with AI generated personalized email is nice.
There's a lot.
One tip, maybe for listeners or founders, I could give: catch Alice at paddleboard by organized with the happy hours or during SF Tech Week or even Blueprint when the VC funds are organizing happy hours. That's a way where they are more accessible. So in case they are
Yeah.
not replying on email.
I definitely agree with that because for any of the events that we host, especially the big ones during Tech Week and the like, we do actually go through and we have to review people before we accept them just because there is a capacity. So I do end up like meeting with a lot of the startups that come and attend our SF Tech Week event. So that's actually a really, really good point is, yeah, if there's any events that we're hosting that's like open to everyone, definitely try to join. We do have a Luma page. Guillaume does a great job at hosting events in Europe and Middle East. Yeah, I would say that's definitely a good way to get in touch. And our team does end up attending a lot of conferences.
And how do you develop skills which you have now versus when you just started in the field? How did you learn it now? And for the next level you're going, what are the new skills you have to learn?
Oh my God. I don't know. I think with this job in particular, I think a lot of it is pattern recognition. And I don't know if it's something that you can kind of just learn. Like you can probably go read books about, what are the founders. You can probably go read as many construction books as possible. But I do think like part of it is experience based and it's just seeing what's happened, seeing what's worked, seeing what hasn't worked, talking to people about what's worked, what hasn't worked. Actually, I do think to shortcut that, maybe, yeah, just talking to people about what's worked, what doesn't work, and really just trying to like learn about, all the different options and, really testing out, you know, these three startups are similar to this new one, right? These things worked for these three, what hasn't worked for these three, which one of those can get applied to this new one. And honestly, like with a lot of our Formwork Labs programming, what we've realized is it's really hard for people to take away from just classes because sometimes like as an example like a sales class or a marketing class, like things are changing so differently, and also like what works for an architecture based startup isn't going to work for a construction based startup. So I think for us, like the best way for some startups to learn is actually through storytelling and experience. And that's what we've tried to incorporate into our program, where we actually have people come and talk about what did they do last year, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and even just giving like examples of go-to-market strategies that worked, or go-to-market strategies where they've spent, a ton of money on and it hasn't worked. So we talked a little bit about conferences, and there's also a strategy within conferences, not just like going to conferences, but how do you engage? Do you have, customers that that really love you? Can they bring customers to go join you? Like there's just all of these strategies that are worth talking about, because there's going to be things that work for different startups. And yeah, I would say like to learn, a lot of it is like talking to people and doing that pattern recognition. And I think for VC, like it is kind of, time in the job and experience and exposure that really does help get you better. And like the years in the role does matter too, because if you think back to 2021, when all the like startup valuations were extremely crazy and like a lot of overvalued startups, like money was basically free, sometimes it's like only in a lifetime of a person do you see something like that, which is also kind of like messed up, right? Like a lot of people are saying like the investors of, I guess, my generation, or like the more, younger VCs who haven't been doing it for 30 years have only seen, up and to the right. And I think generally if you take that and talk about the stock market and how people have investing, right? Like the millennials have only seen up and to the right. They've never seen kind of a depression type situation. So yeah, stock market, finance, VC, I think because it's all like kind of market correlated, just being able to look at history, understand, what's happened, what hasn't happened, and what's worked. Like obviously the world is changing, but there's so much of that that's just like exposure, and getting yourself exposed to as much of these like edge cases and weird scenarios is very important, because I think that's also like how you're going to have your edge, right? And I guess with us, looking at construction, like seeing what's worked in adjacent industries is also very important. So I don't know if that's like a good answer on like, who to prep, but yeah, moving forward, I feel like a lot of it is doing the same thing. Is just trying to like keep learning about what's going on and trying to think of your own trends. And even if you can't necessarily think of your own trends, there's a lot of really smart people out there that, you can go listen to what they're saying, but still kind of question it, not obviously just like following them blindly. But I do think like there is a little bit of like analytics that you have to do on, how is the world changing? And I think for us in construction, there is also a little bit of that uniqueness where, the way that contractors think is very unique, and you kind of have to like marry how contractors think and what is the like trend from a technology perspective, and figure out where they meet, because a lot of the times the timing just may be completely off.
Who are the people in Silicon Valley, founder, investor, you find they've done amazing work?
I mean, there are
Top
a
three.
lot of really great funds out there, but then like things have also changed, right? A lot of the like top Silicon Valley VCs, they've just grown so much that they're now managing, billions and billions of dollars. And at some point you realize that like, you really can't only invest in venture capital. So what you've seen is like now there's all these like big funds that start doing all different types of investing. So I don't know if I necessarily have like a top three favorite, but I do have one fund that I want to call out that I think is extremely interesting, purely just based on this one thing that they're doing. So I think anyone doing construction tech should also look at what's happening in the private equity space, especially as, there's been a lot of roll-ups on your customer side, right? So that's very important. But with a lot of these private equity funds, what we're learning is that a lot of them are actually bringing in technology layers to help make these businesses more efficient. And A16Z actually has a partnership and invested in a company called E3 Tech. And E3 Tech is buying businesses. So it's kind of like a holdings company. They're buying traditional industrial businesses. They bought this company called Sylvan, and you have E3 Tech. They're buying industrial businesses that are, operational services businesses. So in the Sylvan case, like, yeah, it's like a, fully functioning construction company. And E3 Tech has also launched a venture studio. and they are launching AI-focused startups that are learning and understanding the inefficiencies within the Sylvan company. So obviously there's like plus deltas about, do you want to start a company solely based on one company, right? So this is some of the challenges with spinouts where you may build a solution just for a company rather than 90% of the market. So you can't really scale. So there are plus and minuses with that, but I just think this is just such a unique and interesting, I don't even know if it's like I don't want to call it a new business model, but just like a culmination of ideas that I find extremely interesting because you have private equity going on, you want to make businesses more efficient, they have capital to do it. So just the amount of money invested into new technologies, innovation, or even like building their own technologies, I think that's going to be a shift in terms of how we invest. Because as VCs and as investors, you're now thinking about like, okay, we're now no longer like only competing with or looking at like startups that are building technology, but now you have big companies building technologies, right? And this is on top of, companies building their own tech, right? So they're building their own tech and then they're also building technologies that they think they can go sell to the rest of the market. So just these dynamics are just changing. If you're looking at a company, there's no longer just the competition of the incumbents or other venture-backed startups. You're now looking at venture-backed startups versus like pseudo private equity backed startups versus, more, bootstrap tech or even just like, or are companies going to build this internally? So it's just a very interesting time to be in the space. I don't know like how to like quantify or calculate or like figure out, how to even play in this space because it's still fairly new. But I do think it's extremely interesting and it's something that we're going to continue to follow over time because depending on how people want to build and buy technology, I think that does change your TAM for some of these software businesses.
This is such a great story. Very unique insight and like definitely because I also looking what is a AI native design firm, AI native contracting firm. Either you
Yeah.
build it from scratch or you buy a firm and then like do the whole private equity style transformation. Are there any
Uh-huh.
other stories which you noticed across emerging trends?
I mean, I think that's going to be the most interesting thing. Um, and it's something that I've been kind of talking about and thinking about over the last couple of years is like, how is the construction industry going to adopt AI? And like for a long time, automation has been extremely hard. And there was always this like threat of, I don't want my jobs to go away. And, there's always that argument that like, oh no, like you're going to be, there's still going to be human in the loop and you still need to like control the AI or control the robotics or whatever, however you want to talk about it. Because there's always been this like fear of automating out people's jobs, I think there's always been this like hesitancy in adopting new technology. So my like bet um was slash is the way to really scale in construction for AI is going to be AI powered services because like it's fair game when you're competing. And if you can prove out, you have way higher margins and you can compete and win projects at a lower cost than some of these like fully, manual human powered services businesses. Like I think that's where everything gets interesting because contractors, the entire industry from architects down, the entire supply chain is extremely competitive. It's all very price sensitive, extremely competitive, and there's like sales tactics where if you're trying to sell software, you tell someone that like their competitor is using your software and they're like, "Oh my God, I like must know what it is because if my competitor is using it, I need to make sure that I can still compete with my competitor, right?" So from a AI powered services perspective, like I would love for AI powered services to go show kind of like, be the first business model to go compete directly with human powered services and show them that you're going to win a ton of work with way higher margins. And then it's just like a reality check to the industry that like, oh crap, if I don't adopt these AI tools, I'm going to be left behind because guess what? They're going to be able to do a majority of the work for, way higher margins, leveraging technology. And I'm not even talking about AI specifically, but any type of like automation technology, right? So I think that'll be very interesting to see like how the industry interacts. And I do think like, because the industry is so competitive and if you can win and win with high margins, like that's a business that I'd love to see more of. Whether or not it's like more private equity based or venture capital based, or, I'm sure people can even do this on their own, smaller construction or design firms. I feel like if they AI the hell out of, as many workflows as they can, and they have the capital to do that initial upfront investment, and it's only going to get, less and less expensive, and compete, I think you can see a lot of these businesses grow pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm testing something like in my product device AI native service. It's a big opportunity. Please, can you maybe give some overview about a founder who is what are the common struggles from 0 to 100K ARR, 100 to 1 million, 1 to 10?
From 0 to 100, I think it still tends to be like, how do I get my first couple of pilots to, whether it's paid or unpaid, into actual contracts. So I think that still tends to be the struggle. And then you said 100 to 1,
What?
is that the
Yeah.
next? From 100 to 1, I think it's at that point you're still kind of figuring out your ICP, I think. I think everyone still has they have an idea of who they should target, but from the 100K to 1 million, you're still trying to figure that out. And you are probably trying to, even through your pilots, figure out like, is the market segment, the project type, the specific customer size, like there's even regions, right? There could be regional differences. And I do think in that time frame, you're still trying to figure out like, okay, what is that ideal customer profile? And then 1 to 10 tends to be renewals, churn, trying to just make sure that the customers are happy. You're continuing to grow product and provide value to those customers so that they can really become, raving fans of what you guys are doing and kind of help, spread that into the industry. I would say like you may even want to do like 1 to 5 and then 5 to 10. There may be different
Okay.
challenges. Like maybe 1 to 5 is more that. And then for 5 to 10 is really making sure that like operationally the business is really good. And you've got, your sales engine down. You've got like basically all the operational things down to really get from 5 to 10. And then I feel like honestly, after 10, it may kind of just be like a, self running machine at that point, because you will have probably built enough credibility and trust with the industry that you're a like known brand, you're a known entity. Customers start referring you to other customers, and you almost get to this like, flywheel of, that should be easier. This is kind of like based on, some of the past examples and kind of what we're seeing. But yeah, hopefully those, I mean, I think there's multiple challenges with every kind of
Yeah.
part of the journey.
I was thinking, like, are there like any big challenges in hiring?
Yes. The interesting thing is like, I would say maybe 3 to 5 years ago, there was like a ton of really, really good talent that came from like I kind of call it like first generation kind of field focused construction tech. So like the plan grids, field wires, like all of those guys, right? Like 3 to 5 years ago, there's probably like, a playbook to hiring from, some of the established construction tech players as well as people from industry. I think now there's just like so many more startups that it's almost become challenging to hire, because you now have like a greater sea of people who have done kind of some level of construction tech sales, some level of, construction tech like customer success and here and there. And I think in the last couple of years, we've also just seen a lot of like people change positions even within construction tech. So kind of depending on what you're doing, like hiring existing construction tech challenge can be a little bit more challenging. And then from the industry side, I think that's where it's becoming easier, because there's a lot more construction industry professionals that want to join construction tech startups. But of course, with that, you also need to spend a lot more time like hiring, onboarding, and helping with
Mm.
that like cultural and work shift from working at a construction company to working at a tech startup. So yeah, I don't know. I think like a lot of the like, really, really top tier talent has probably been hired away to some of these like slightly later stage, well-funded construction tech companies. Not saying that like you can't go after them, but you now have to figure out like who are the people that they've hired and trained and worked with that are really good talent that you could go either, if you could poach or you kind of have to wait until, some of these exits. And then that's when people kind of are back out looking. Right now money's not cheap, so you can't really go, compete against talent. And frankly, a lot of these AI companies are extremely well funded and they are taking a lot of talent and making, at least on the like tech and AI side, making it pretty unaffordable for construction tech companies to hire just because like generally speaking, construction tech hasn't raised like some of the crazy rounds aside from some of the like hardware or kind of, like one-off kind of AI companies. So, yeah, I don't know. It's also an interesting time with like hiring and recruiting. There's definitely no shortage of like people who are experienced in offering consulting services. So I think that also makes it harder is like there's people who want to do more consulting work and part-time work with construction tech startups versus like going there and like getting back in the weeds.
Because I personally saw like best talent in AI would be super expensive in Valley, and enterprise sales were a lot more experienced than Series B or later would like pay them very good amount of money. We have a rapid fire to wrap up. So 5 to 10 seconds to answer it briefly. What's your favorite restaurant?
Oh, in San Francisco, probably Suvla,
City or country which is in your travel bucket list?
Johannesburg, South Africa.
A movie you watched last year which stood out?
Oh, I rewatched Wally, which was extremely interesting to rewatch again, I guess just last year.
If you were to recommend only one book or let's say one video to a founder, what would be that be?
Probably Secrets of Sand Hill Road. It's a little outdated now with some of the stuff that they talk about, but it's kind of like VC 101. And I think to raise money from VCs, it's good to understand kind of where they're coming from and how they operate.
Are you a cat person or a dog person? I know the answer, but
I have a cat. I like dogs too, but I have a cat.
I see. One fun fact about you, which like most of the people don't know.
I don't know. I guess on the cat part, I take my cat out for walks.
I've seen like a dedicated Instagram. It's very cute. Alice, anything which we didn't cover in this interview and you'd like to end on that closing note?
I guess not. We definitely still need a lot more technology in the construction industry. So please keep building tech. We need more. I know sometimes it can feel like a huge challenge because selling to the industry is a challenge. But, across all the other industries, I will say that we still see pretty low churn numbers if you're, solving a big problem and focusing on your customers. So just build more tech for us.